don't have a video for you, Marcus, huh?
All good, all good. More time to talk, right?
That's right. That's the right.
Yeah.
Because I mean, sometimes we need like pictures and what have you to get people to understand where we are and how important this moment is.
Mhm.
Um, but we'll get plenty of those because the news is reporting it every single night as we watch these primary caucuses going on around the country. But you're the national political director of People for the American Way. So tell us, what that's all about. What is People for the American Way, and what role are you playing in this upcoming election?
Yeah, so People for the American Way is a national advocacy organization focused on protecting what we like to categorize as truth, justice, and the American way. Our right to live in a free society where our children have access to quality education, where they can learn our true history, where our communities are both safe and just, where the laws protect our individual freedoms and rights. And the American way we encapsulize as really the ever growing movement to expand our democracy and really preserving the ability for us to preserve our democracy. We know we've got unprecedented attacks rooted in authoritarianism, rooted in racism. And so our job in terms of protecting our democracy is central to the focus at People for the American Way. And we do that in a couple ways. One is by building coalitions. We organize Black pastors across the country to protect the right to vote and move their residents and their congregations to the polls. We organize young elected officials under the age of 35 from local school boards all the way to the United States Congress to advance legislation that protects those rights. We're working with grandparents around the country to advocate and organize against book bans and attacks on local institutions like school boards, where we know is a battleground for the right to protect, the right to learn. So we're doing all of that work. We've been doing all of that work in the lead up to 2024. But we know both kind of in rhetoric and in practice, the real battleground for all of those issues is happening in November. And so we're gearing up to be across the country to organize those networks, to make clear what the stakes are in this election, and get our folks to the polls to keep Donald Trump out of the White House.
I'm going to go off script a little bit because, I've known you since you were a student at Thurgood Marshall
Yeah.
at public charter school.
Mhm.
And even as a middle school, high school student, you have always been engaged. We talk about young people who danced all their lives or people who want to be architects, but your path has always been politics.
Mhm.
And so I just want to know kind of, and you're from DC, grew up in Ward 8, where we have sort of the lowest voting turnout in the city,
Mhm.
but you've run for office, you're running for office.
Mhm.
But what is it about politics that keeps you going, that keeps you, engaged and wanting to, get more people into the pool?
Yeah, well, I think a couple of things. One of it is just good example. I mean, it's hard to not, when you live off of Martin Luther King Avenue and go to a school named after Martin Luther King and your barbershop's named after Martin Luther King. It's hard for some of that activism not to rub off, but also, I mean, better than most, kind of DC being an example of Black political power, and the fact that I got to grow up and see myself in the process was very important. And so I think good example of earnest activism, of always working in the interest of community, but also in the interest of justice, is just something that I got to see firsthand. But second, I also got the opportunity to be a part of it. And so, I think it's really important that we continue to create avenues for young people to be engaged. I was an active member of Young Democrats, but I also got to, run in the Ward 8 Democrats when I was 19 or 20 years old, and run for office, when I was practically a teenager for the first time. And so, having communities open, and showing young people that they can be a part of the process is more important now more than ever, I think.
So we just had recently this week the Iowa caucus
Yes.
in on Monday. Freezing cold weather, but folks still got out there and did their thing. We're moving towards New Hampshire and then South Carolina. How would you sort of explain to folks, I mean, the impact of what's happening in these races and why, like, the ultimate goal, as you said in November, what we need to be watching, paying attention to, and engaging in?
Yeah, so I mean, finally the races have started. I think they've been long anticipated, but I think what we've been seeing in the early contests, especially in Iowa, is that kind of the conclusion we assumed 6 months ago, a year ago, still stays the same. That Donald Trump will likely be the Republican nominee again for president of the United States, and that really makes the stakes very clear. He's been abundantly clear about what he wants to do when he gets into the White House. He said he wants to be a dictator for the day. Him and his acolytes have talked very publicly about running the largest deportation program in the country's history, eyeing 10 million undocumented folks for arrest and deportation. He's talked about sending troops into majority black cities to quell violence and crime. He's talked about the president needing absolute immunity to do whatever he or she wants to do, and not being susceptible to prosecution or accountability for that, either in office or afterwards. And so when we talk about the stakes in this election, as much as we need to focus on the kitchen table issues, how the economy is working for people, how we're supporting people who are working class and poor, we also need to make clear the stakes that this isn't a regular election, that this is democracy or not, that they are not being coy about their intentions, and they are serious. And so we need to make those stakes clear and move our people to the polls as urgently as possible.
So how are you doing that? I mean, how are you getting the message out for people to understand what these threats to democracy, that they're right now they're threats. They could become reality. So
Yeah.
what is the organization doing, the People for American Way doing to counteract these threats?
Well, I will say I think that they are, and maybe threats is probably too soft a word for what's happening here. There are active assaults on our democracy. I mean, we saw, in 2013, a year after President Obama was elected, the Supreme Court strike down major provisions of the Voting Rights Act, and we've seen since, state by state, states literally shred away people's access to the ballot. So we're not just talking about having to mobilize and get our people to the polls. We're also talking about protecting their right to vote when they get there. And even though 2023 was not an election year, we saw 14 states pass voter suppression legislation. We saw over 70 lawsuits against those states to protect the right to vote. So there's an active assault on the right to vote, and People for the American Way is in that fight. We're urging President Biden to get as many pro-democracy minded justices appointed to the federal bench as quickly as possible. We are working we're working to elect folks like in Virginia. We spent a lot of time in Virginia last year, and because they have a Democratic majority, they were able to beat back Republican legislation to actually restrict early voting in the Commonwealth. And so we have to continue to do that work. And those assaults will get, I think, even more intense over the next several months. And so we've got to be vigilant. And we also, I'll just say, lastly, spend a lot of time educating folks on what the far right is doing. We run a online publication called Right Wing Watch that exposes the far right's attacks that sometimes go under the radar. And so we'll spend a lot of time also pushing that news to the folks who need it most, so that the stakes and the threats are clear.
There are those that are actually actively engaged in the political arena right now. The pro-Trump folks. I mean, they're serious.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's some who are, I think, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong, but appears to be more lighthearted folks who are, pro Democrat, pro Biden, and a whole bunch of folks, particularly young people, who are saying, "Look, I'm done."
Mhm.
What would you say, particularly to those that third group of folk,
Mhm.
to get them really more conscious about why this election is so crucial? I mean, you've outlined it, but the message isn't coming across.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we grapple with every day as an organization. How we organize communities, how we come up with messages that people get and that resonate. And the fact is, because democracy hasn't worked for so many, because so many people have struggled just to access the ballot, because so many people have voted and still seen their rights, chipped away at, it doesn't seem like the process is working. And to a certain degree, right, this Congress is less functional than most in American history in terms of the number of bills they passed. And so voters aren't wrong to some degree, but not participating is a vote. Not voting is a vote, and it's not just a choice between kind of the lesser of two evils. It really is the choice between, like I said, the opportunity to get all of the problems right again. Donald Trump is very clear that he will have that he wants ultimate authority in this country, and it's rooted in racism. It's rooted in suppression. It's rooted in subjugation. And if we allow him to get back into the White House, all of those kitchen table issues, all of those economic issues, all of the foreign policy issues that keep me as a young voter up at night, we don't get an opportunity to solve those things. And so we've got to just make clear that the stakes aren't binary, right? They aren't they aren't balanced. This isn't about kind of a balanced choice. This is about defending all that we have and the opportunity to build a brighter future that we want. And so that's the message I know we'll be taking to young voters as well.
So I know we're kind of running out of time, but I think for those who are very clear about who Trump is and what he stands for, and why they would not want him possibly to be their next president.
Mhm.
But I think the challenge is getting folks to understand, knowing who Biden is
Yeah.
and why they should support, another term. What is it that they are going to get that's any different if the messaging isn't there? So I'm just trying to figure out, as opposed to, I sound like one of those politicians that say, I don't
Mhm.
want to talk about Trump.
Right.
Let's talk about Biden,
Right.
tell me why I should support him.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's clear that President Biden and Vice President Harris have to make the case for reelection. They have to earn reelection. The fact is that poor folks and Black folks don't feel, even while the economy is getting better statistically, even while kind of all of these metrics are improving statistically, some communities aren't feeling it on the ground. And so they're going to have to make the case about why American voters should stick with them for another 4 years. But I don't think that their case is insufficient. I think that they've done transformative work to set the economy in a positive direction. They've appointed more women and more minorities to federal benches than any administration in American history. They're doing earnest work. They're working earnestly to protect voting rights, even though a right-wing Congress is doing everything it can to block progress on that. They created the first ever office on gun violence prevention and are sending folks into communities to help people grapple with an issue that we shouldn't have as a modern and progressive country. And so they have a good case to make, but they do have to go out and make it. It has to be about more than Trump for sure. But we have to, but we can't minimize Trump. I think the one of the risks in this election is that people become numb to Trump's rhetoric, that people become numb to the real threats that he's laying out very plainly for us. And so we've got to make both of those cases at the same time. President Biden's got to do his job. Organizations like ours have to do our job to protect our democracy. And both of those things have to work well at the same time.
Marcus, thank you so much for your input, your perspective, and helping us to understand at least what People for the American Way stands for, and how critical this election is
Yes.
coming up in November. We want to keep our eyes and ears open, and even though those of us in the District of Columbia still feel very disenfranchised, but we still have a role to play in this election. So.
That's right. DC, stay hood.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. But thanks for being with us today, and we
absolutely.
might want to bring you back. Well, as we said, we know you're engaged in a political fight of your own, and
Sure.
so we'll be following that, and as well as learning more about what People in American for the American Way are doing. So, thanks a lot for being with us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All righty, have a good one.